I'm so excited to have her on. Let me read you her bio. My special guest this evening is Rebecca Jernigan. And Rebecca Jernigan's enhanced psi abilities were discovered at the age of 4 years old, growing up in a Midwest farm. While learning how to gently care for animals and nurture gardens, her innate psychic abilities continue to flourish naturally. As a young adult, Rebecca expanded her knowledge and practices of psi by understanding a wide range of intense studies in a variety of metaphysical subjects. Counter to the Skeptical Society of 1988, Rebecca's strong and capable use of clairvoyance, mediumship, and channeling allowed her the confidence to own her own practice as a professional psychic reader consult. As her business grew, so did her thirst for more knowledge, and leading her to explore and excel in the fascinating and socially beneficial fields of hypnosis, past life regressions, divine healing, meditation, and Reiki, which Rebecca is a master teacher in 5 Reiki disciplines. While maintaining a successful one-on-one metaphysical practice, Rebecca's enhanced psi abilities have long been sought after by business world, from small business ventures to large corporations. Using what she has branded as intuitive diagnostics, it is common for Rebecca to consult with high-level executives, CEOs, and CFOs, providing clear and guiding insight on a clairvoyant level for issues concerning large financial decisions, business negotiations, restructuring of human resources, and operations, and exact personnel issues. Within the last decade, Rebecca has been called to apply her psi abilities behind the scenes in high-profile, Hollywood entertainment cases. Most recently, the psychic work she performed for a Hollywood executive producing team's lawsuit against a major television network resulted in a complete victory for the executive producers in an astounding and record-breaking 4 days. On the other end of the criminal justice arena, Rebecca discreetly assists those who have been victimized in crimes, as well as their family members and legal counsel. And earlier in 2006, Rebecca consulted long-distance on a week-old missing persons case in New Orleans without knowing the name or age of the abducted victim. Her information was once again proved exact, and the case was resolved within an amazing 24 hours. Rebecca has also worked privately with police and Department of Justice on several high-profile cases. She carried out many successful ghost hunting excursions throughout the United States, as well as investigating ancient sites in the U.S. and abroad. Rebecca Jernigan's clients aren't the only people who benefit from the psychic's quick wit, infectious laugh, and extensive metaphysical knowledge and applications. Before the recent influx of psychics on television, camera-friendly and outspoken Rebecca was one of the first psychics on television to host not only 1 but 2 television series, Psychic Voyages and Psychic Impressions. Later, when the internet proved a viable medium for reaching audiences worldwide, Rebecca turned her attentions to her own upbeat, informative radio show series, Journeys with Rebecca, which caters to an international audience carried by several sites, as well as journeyswithrebecca.com. And she is a pioneer of internet radio, with an impressive guest list who join her on her show. Currently, Rebecca teaches several small informal classes, has written several books, holds reading sessions, and is available through her website for contact and questions. Her website's journeyswithrebecca.com. And please welcome Rebecca to the show this evening. Good evening, Rebecca.
Wow.
I know. I said it. A long bio.
Well, yeah, and as you can tell, I did not write that.
It's beautiful. Well, you know what? I didn't want to. I was going to edit it, but I was like, no, this is important information. So I read the entire thing.
Oh, well, very nice of you, and thank you. And it's just a thrill to be here. Honest to God, it really is. It's just fabulous.
Well, it's wonderful to have you on. I love your energy, and I like I said, I heard you with JP, and I was like, I forgot to have her on my show. So I'm very, very happy to have you with us. I know the listeners are. Well, tell everybody what intuitive diagnostic is. First of all, I love that the way you titled it. So let's start there.
Well, intuitive diagnostics, I was working on that in the 90s for about 4 or 5 years, and I went around in the Kansas City area and started with a company that I was actually working for at the time, where I would meet with the owner. In this case, it was he was the co-owner as well as the chief operating executive, and it was helping him to look at the employees and what positions they were holding and what they were doing. Many of the employees, they were underutilized, some were overutilized, some didn't belong there, not because they were bad people, but the job itself wasn't a good fit for them. Mm-hmm. So I went through all the people in the roster of what was there, who the employees were, told them to look at things a little differently, learning how to readjust job titles for specific job duties that would be beneficial to each of the individuals that he kept on, and then also to source out those people who weren't a good fit and find companies that were a good fit for them, or industries, if you will. So that's where that started, and then he appreciated my work so much that he had a couple of other people, and it just kind of went off and running. And I did that for a while. I will tell you, it was an extraordinarily time-consuming endeavor, because I would have to sit in an organization for sometimes weeks at a time, and I'd have to sit and observe every department and know exactly what they were doing. I would have to read their logs as far as who's doing what, where, how, and when, what was their job description and title, what were they actually doing versus that. And it got to be extremely, it just tied up so much of my time that I thought, okay, there's got to be a better way to streamline this. And I never really did find another way to streamline it. Instead, I turned my attentions into smaller organizations, smaller groups, startup companies. I haven't done that since I started radio, which is in the early 2000s. I did give that up because the travel was a lot. Having to travel and then to be sitting someplace, for 2 or 3 weeks at a time was difficult. So it was harder than going to work 9 to 5 myself.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So really what it was is just going in and just doing a diagnosis of the company and really checking out the people and seeing who was being used and how they were being used. And in every case, I have to tell you, I'm toot my own horn a little bit here. In every case, the main changes that they made overall improved the company, improved the morale, and improved the efficiency and the happiness as well of the employees, and that was one of the big things that I tried to get across to those that were part of the hiring team and the owners and the CFOs, the CEOs, and all of that. Was it wasn't just about them hiring somebody to come work for them. It was also about those people devoting their life to them. So it was a two-way street, not a one-way street, because they do have a tendency to look at it that way, and that people aren't expendable, but what they are is maybe put into a wrong position. They may have the skills, but they're not happy doing it.
Right.
So it really was an educational process, as well as moving people around and changing job descriptions. It wasn't about cutting people from their jobs. That was the last thing I really wanted to do. But there was, very few people that really had to be outsourced into other companies, but they were happier for the changes that were made for them. So, and it gets a little dicey when you start using different intuitive skills in a company, and they certainly aren't going to advertise that that's what they've done. So,
Right. Yeah, I love it. That's like a psychic profiler for the personnel. It's almost like human resources with a radar system. Did you ever factor in astrology at all, or any type of insofar as zodiac signs with their positions?
But that's an interesting question, because I will tell you, in all my personal sessions, and many of them, I'm going to say probably an average of 60 to 70% astrology comes into it. The messages will be something very directed for the client that has something to do with their astrology or the astrology of another person. And I'm not an astrologer. I actually went through some classes and courses on it. It's just one of those things that I just don't get. And I think it's the verbiage that I get hung up on, when I'm in a classroom setting. But it still comes through. Astrology, numerology, all of that stuff is really significant. It's very significant. There's nothing is separate, as you well know, Solaris, from one person or from anything. We're all connected to all things. So you can't just take astrology and you can't just take numerology. But if you add all of these different components together, even if it's just a little here and a little there, and you add them together, it syncs up, and it works, I think, a lot better when you don't dismiss certain portions of it, because it's all valuable. It's just when is it valuable?
Exactly. Yeah. I have a tendency to do that subconsciously around people anyway, when I just from my background, you tend to look at the zodiacs or their birth dates in association with, and it does put things together insofar as the personality goes. I was going to ask you about the psychic detective, insofar as you doing work for detectives and police departments. How did you get recruited into that?
Well, interestingly enough, it actually started in a healing class that I was doing. I used to do open houses and invite people in, and I would have 2 or 3 people there that were also Reiki practitioners or healing techniques, whatever we were happened to be doing that for that evening. And a gentleman approached me, and he got himself a session, a free session with us, and he came back a couple more times, and then he called me one day out of the clear blue and said, I need to come by and talk to you, but I need to do this not in a group setting. And I said, okay. So he came to the house and he said he had a case for me to work on. And it was unofficial, and it was working with the Justice Department. And then after I did that with him, then he gave my name to a few of the people that he knew in the legal system, police departments. And I had a few of them call me. And of course, it's all off the record for assistance and help and information. So that's how that got started. It's not like you can go to the police department and say, here, I'd like to help you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there are some really interesting policemen and detectives, in that regime, in that whole thing, that are really open-minded, and they're very, very intuitive themselves. Many of them have to be, depending on what they've done, if they've been a beat cop, so to speak, or a patrol car in some dangerous areas, they have to use those skills. They have to use their intuition. They have to, their instincts, all of that. They have a heightened sense of awareness of everything around them. So they're good candidates for that because they're open to it, because they sense things and they feel things that haven't transpired yet. And it's saved a lot of their lives by doing that. So
right,
I think it's part of their profession, really.
I agree. And did you notice, do you do the remote viewing? Does that factor into solving some of their cases at all, or no?
And matter of fact, most of it is.
Okay.
Most of it's remote viewing.
I know some people like to, they don't like saying it's remote viewing. They want to just say it's psychic vision. Or how do you define the two for you?
I don't. They're so similar, really, Solaris, for me. They're just so similar. It's like, where do you divide one to the other? And I'm so glad we're talking about this, because what is a psychic impression? What is a remote viewing? Where does it come from? You're a remote viewer, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so if you're remote viewing, do you have a target when you sit down, or do you just sit down and it just happens for you?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, it depends if I'm supposed to be looking for a target or not. But yeah, there are other times when I just have the access and I just do it.
Right. There
right.
it is. I think it's just part of the whole picture that we call under the psychic sort of, or ESP umbrella.
Correct. I agree. Yeah. It's some people, like in the military, I won't mention certain names, but it's ED. No, but seriously, they get really bent out of shape if they say, oh, psychics aren't the same as remote viewers. And, they get really, they get an attitude. But I consider it to be, before there was remote viewing, and the title of remote viewing, there was always the scrying and other things that went on way before all this.
Sure. And what's scrying? Isn't that remote viewing?
Exactly.
That's exactly what that is. I mean, if you put it into those terms, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really fascinating. Yeah, it's a beautiful gift. And once again, looking at your bio there, you started this as a child. So how did that happen when you first started developing?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a weird story, honestly. My aunt had just gotten married, and she had lived in Chicago. In those days, I lived in Michigan. She lived in Chicago, and she brought her new husband for all of us to meet, right? So it was a big family gathering at my grandparents' house with my parents and my aunt and my new uncle. And so I'm standing there next to my mom, and she says, you need to go give your uncle a hug. And I said, I can't. And I was real shy in those days, believe it or not. She said, yes, you have to. And I said, I can't. He's a bad man. And that story will pick up a little bit later. And my mom kind of forced me to do that. And I really just I just cringed when I had to do that. And later on, what we found out, my aunt's husband beat her up so bad that she ended up in the hospital. And somewhere I knew that as a 4-year-old child, I knew that I could sense that about him. Mm-hmm. The second thing that happened when I was 4 years old is I was standing in the kitchen with my mom, and I don't remember what she asked me, and I said something. And she turned around, she whipped her head around and looked at me. She said, now, where did you hear that? And I said, well, that man told me. She said, what man? She's looking around the room, and I said, that man. She goes, there is no one there. And so I argued with her for a few minutes. Of course, I lost the argument because she couldn't see him, but I could. And there was an inkling back there that I recognized that there was things that I was seeing that nobody else was seeing. And so for many years, I questioned whether I was actually seeing things, if it was my quote unquote imagination. Well, what is your imagination? There's the fine line there with that. And so, that's kind of how all that started was, is all these little small incidences like that kind of culminated. And when I got to be older and I was able to kind of put it all together, I was like, wow, okay. So, I hid a lot of that from people afterwards because no one could see what I could see. And I got into trouble all the time for talking to people that weren't there.
Wow. What sign are you? Can I ask?
I'm an Aquarian.
You? Okay. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Just curious of the extra sensitive.
Scorpio moon, Scorpio ascendant.
There you go. I was going to say water had to be in there somewhere, but yeah.
Oh, I got lots and lots of Scorpio in my chart.
Wow.
My birth chart. 5 planets were in Scorpio when I was born. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of a weird combo, Yeah,
but you know what? It's good you have the Aquarian in you. That balances you're less rigid with Scorpio can be very intense.
Oh, yes, we can.
Yeah, but still it's good. And then, when you think about it, that explains a lot of your wiring at a young age because Scorpios are super psychic as well.
And let's talk about the wiring and being super sensitive. Intuitively, I think that many people are I think there's a lot more people out there that are actually empathic than they recognize. I'd like to talk about that for a minute if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think that's cool. One of the comparisons that I give is like you walk into a room and maybe you're just you're feeling pretty good about life. You've had a good day and you're feeling kind of upbeat. You walk into a room. Let's just say it's a social gathering, okay? And you don't know too many people there, if anyone. And you walk in and you get into the middle of the room, and then pretty soon you start feeling really agitated. And you're starting to feel depressed or down, or your mood shifts very significantly to the point where you even recognize it. Well, then if you really kind of step back and you go into what I call the observation mode, and you start observing the people around you, you'll begin to pick up on the fact that maybe there were people there that were mad, that a couple that was having an argument, people that didn't like each other. So there's all this negative stuff floating around in the room, and an empath will pick that up because the negative stuff is what's at the surface, because it's expendable, right? When we get mad, it's an expendable energy. We expend it and then it's over with. Love is not like that. Love is and happiness and all that is something that's usually a little deeper. It's not usually an expendable thing. We either carry it with us, as part of us. We may have an explosive moment, but then we go back into our state of being, which is happy or, mellow or whatever the case may be, depending on your personality. So I think there's a lot of people who are empathic that if they will kind of pay attention to what happens when they get out in crowds, if they're in a busy store, it could be grocery store or shopping somewhere, whatever the case, if they begin to feel like their mood has shifted, pay attention, be aware, self-aware. When you go somewhere, how do you feel? Walk into a place, don't try to figure out what's going on, just allow the things to happen naturally and just be in an observant mode, and you'll be able to tell whether or not you are an empath, because there's things that you have to do as an empath if you're not aware of it, that you can prevent some of those severe mood swings and allowing other people's emotional states of being mess with yourself. You keep yourself centered and focused no matter what else is going on around you or who else is going on around you in that case.
Yeah, so, that's very good information right there. What is your advice insofar as shielding for empaths?
My biggest thing is what the guys have told me, and I went through the whole gamut of things of putting up the protection and making sure that I was shielded by checking my aura and all of that stuff. If you are doing the work long enough, and you're enmeshed in this unseen world that we're talking about here, those things are not as much as important as when you walk in, as you know that you're going to be okay, that anything that comes at you will go around you, go over you, it won't affect you. And if you're observant, you can see things or sense things before they actually arrive in your space. So you can deflect them, you can dismiss them, whatever, depends on what it is. Everything is dependent upon another thing. So, I tell people it's just to be really observant. And in order to do that, you have to kind of get inside and know yourself and be observant of how your mood shifts. How do you feel? And then you begin to look around. Sometimes it's just the noise. The noise will be something that will set you off. It's not necessarily people, but it's a noise. Sometimes when I get into a room and there's TV going and a radio going and people are talking, it's just noise overload.
Right.
And I have to just take a deep breath and I either walk back out or I remove myself from the room for a moment, shift out of it. And then I have to go in and tune things out. I have to tune things out. Now, this is if I'm in my personal environment. I'm not talking about being out in public doing that, because you have to be aware if you're in public. If I'm out in the public for too long, when I come home, the first thing I do is I change my clothes and get everybody else's stuff off me. Right. I don't go to bed with everybody else's stuff on me. I can't explain that enough to people. The Peanuts comic strip and Linus and his that's what it reminds me. You got all that stuff running around you, right? Things that you can't see.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect.
So it's really good. It's really good not to go to bed with other people's stuff, on you. Or to bring that stuff, and carry it around. Things cling to us whether we know it or not. There's all kinds of little tips and tools. I'm sure you probably have a million of them yourself. One of them is I tell people to sit and visualize a waterfall over the doorways. And nice. So what happens is when you walk into the waterfall, anything that doesn't belong to you, that doesn't belong in that house, it's kind of like you program it, so to speak. You leave it on the outside. It just washes it off so that you come in, and of course that would mean anybody that you would invite into your home. If they've got energies and they're not aware people, then you are preventing it from coming into your home. And then when they leave, if it belongs to them, and they'll pick it back up when they go. It's not for us to decide whether they should keep it or not. Right. Oh, and but. Yeah, now you're inflicting your will and your judgment upon somebody else, and that you shouldn't do that. So, I put the waterfalls up there, just an absolutely fantastic little thing. And back doors, front doors, like if you have a garage and people are coming in and out of the garage into your house, that's another thing too. So
I love that.
Yeah, any place there's an opening, so you can program that to do that. It's a really good thing to do.
Programming your environment. I love that. You're taking responsibility for your own atmosphere. Yeah.
And you have to. I mean, you have to own that space. That space is sacred.
Exactly. And it's the body. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's your place where when you put your head on the pillow, you should feel okay about it, at night. Absolutely. And there's other things that you can do. This one of the little tricks that I learned many years ago was to put a mirror in the windows, and that mirror faces outwards. It doesn't have to be a big mirror, just a little tiny mirror. It could be a mirror too that's like hanging on a wall across directly from a window. So that mirror reflects back out so that nothing else can come in that doesn't belong. Right. Yeah, I like those. I use those too. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the mirrors are a really good effect. I still use them. Yeah, it is. It is. I had a really cool lady on many years ago on my show. One of the coolest ladies. She was actually a feng shui architect. Nice. And out of New York. And she went into all these businesses and people's homes and, what have you. And that's how she did that, was through her feng shui. And she was one of the people that also used different techniques like we've been talking about tonight in her feng shui. So she was an intuitive as well as, because there is some learned things obviously in feng shui. There's a whole format, a whole criteria that they go by, but that's what she did. So it was really cool. It was really fun.
Yeah, it's pretty effective. There's no doubt. When you're talking about stuff in the atmosphere, it's interesting because people don't realize when you have your television on what you're bringing. You're bringing that audience into your atmosphere. And I always say, don't leave crap on TV in your home while you're just wandering around the house because you're bringing that energy in your home.
Listen, I'm going to tell you, the TV set's one of those things that I had to learn how to block stuff. And there's certain things that I don't even watch on TV because the content of it is there's subliminals in there. Some people don't believe that, but I do believe that there's subliminals in there. Believe that there is.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And there's some shows that, and they seem very benevolent. They don't seem like they're harmful at all. But when I turn them on, or when they happen to be on, or whatever, it's like an assault. It's like I'm being assaulted. And again, that's being self-aware. If you are being triggered and you don't feel comfortable, you have to honor that. Other people may think you're weird, and it's okay. I'm okay with weird.
Yeah, it's just unique. There you go. But it's the frequency coming through too. I think a lot of the time it's the transmission of the frequency, where and that's toxicity out the wazoo. And a lot of sensitives get that way also. So that's something to look at for sure. And of course, you do the healing sessions, which I wanted to dive into a little bit. Now, we were talking about this off the air, but you do healing sessions. Healing sessions that are not in person.
Right.
So you basically just do them at a distance. We're on Skype.
Yes.
Okay, that's perfect. And of course, if people want to access that and contact you for a session, they can do that through your page.
Yes, my website. Yep, and there's I have a page for appointments, and then go in and schedule, and it's done through a session. It's just called a reading, but anything can happen in that reading. Most all of my clients, as a matter of fact, will ask me how their health is looking, and I always scan them, see what comes up, and that's one of the things that I do is advise them. And I'm not a doctor. I just advise them what I'm seeing, and I advise them, to get it checked out through a doctor, because you have to do that, because none of us are holding medical degrees, and so there's so many litigious people out there. You have to be very careful.
Let's just do a check.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. But everything does start in the energy field. Now, I was going to ask, now you obviously do etheric implant removals and things like that. Do you pull things out of people energetically?
I have helped people to do that. I tell you what happens in those things, on those implants. Those implants are kind of fascinating, by the way. And again, I would like to bring up a guest that I had on. I think he was back in 2008 or 2009. He was an actual surgeon, a medical doctor. And his specialty was removing implants, the physical removal of implants. And he was a real fascinating guy. He lent a lot of credence to the work that people do on an energetic level with removing these implants and other things that regular medical people might not want to touch, or they think you're crazy, or whatever the case may be. But I have helped people with that. They all every implant carries a signature. Energy signatures are one of those things that's kind of a natural thing that I have. I don't know how to explain it. I can go into somebody, and everybody is so unique, Solaris. Everybody is. There's not any, it's like having two guitars, and they're not going to sound exactly the same because they're just slightly different. They look the same or similar, but they're not when it comes down into the notes that it plays, or how it vibrates, or how it feels, right? So the same thing that's why I think astrology, when you brought that up, is very important as well, because that moment in time and place of your birth is unique. Because the energies in the stars, the energies in where you were born, all of that takes a huge role in the creation of your unique energy signature. So when you're looking at something like that in a body, and as an implant, the implant itself will give off its own signal. It has to have come from somewhere if it's in there, right? So you can begin to, for me, what it looks like is it looks like a dark silhouette. No matter where it's at in the body, it's a little dark silhouette, almost like you would be looking at an X-ray, right? And and then you get past that dark silhouette, and then I can begin to see kind of how it was put together. What was it meant to control? What was it? Is it receiving? Is it transmitting? Is it controlling? What's it doing? Because again, every implant is going to be different. They're not going to be the same. So they're all individualized. So depending on what's happening, where it's located, who put it there, how it got there, all of those things is what transpires that makes a person's session their unique session, because no two people are going to ask the same questions or are going to need the same things, because we've all just led totally individualized lives, many lives, and what's brought everyone in that point, in that moment, is totally different from anybody else's experiences.
Right. Yeah, that's well said. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, did that kind of help with
Yeah, it does, because I have my own experiences with implants and signals, and it's a long story. I can fill you in sometime. but I understand those very clearly. There's the etheric ones, which you're right about with the frequency signatures, and then there's the man-made ones. And I was wondering if that was Dr. Roger Lear that you had interviewed, or who was it?
Nope. No,
okay, I was just curious. Okay, very interesting. But yeah, I think that nowadays we have what we call the military abductions, and I'm sure you're familiar with the contactees, and people getting implanted with things that are, in my opinion, connected to covert intelligence. So that's another animal altogether, and I don't know if you've encountered many people like that.
I have not recently. Years ago I did, before it was really known what was going on. Many years ago, and I'm talking about many years ago, I'm talking 20 years ago or so. And so some of these people that I ran across at that point, I didn't exactly know what it was I was looking at. Didn't mean that I couldn't help them, because I could, but I didn't know as much as I do now. If I was to look at those same people now, I would have been able to give them a lot more information than I was able to, say, 20, 30 years ago. When I wasn't really sure what it was I was looking at.
Right. Well, it seems like we were talking about this off air a little bit, but back in the 80s, per se, back in the earlier times, it seemed like we didn't have the kind of covert transmissions that they run today. It was very, very different. People were different, and different energy altogether,
Yeah.
So, I mean, the New Age community or the healing community was very open, and like I was saying, I trusted everybody back then. I didn't think there was anybody who was malicious in any form, but you have to be very careful nowadays. So.
Yeah. And, and I'm going to speak to that for just a moment, because the thing is, I think people need to understand, I used to do sessions in my home. People would come in and sit down and have a session. I had a special room set up that had its own entrance. It got a little weird after I did this for quite a few years like that, I would still do phone consultations, but even along with the in-person sessions. I had a couple of people that went on for a couple of weeks that it seemed like I was just like, I got really bad vibes from them, and rightfully so, as I went down the road later on with them, right? So that's when I kind of just dropped out for a little while. I was like, okay, I need to sit back and reassess how I can do this. And really, that was way before days of Skype, and internet wasn't even all that greatly popular. I mean, it was difficult. So I would then do it. I did it in a business location after that, which was better for me, because it's daytime. There's people around. That kind of stuff, and you're not by yourself. So so that was kind of like my answer to what do I do about this, because I had everybody coming to my home. I had, like I said, it was a private entrance. They didn't come into my home, but they still were at my home. I lived in the other part of it, right? So but yeah, it's not the same. It's just not the same.
I used to do that too, Rebecca. I used to have people come to my house, and I can't believe I did that. Actually, I had a healing room, and I just didn't think twice about it. But then you have to watch out, because there's some people out there that are very messed up. So
it's sad. It's sad.
Yeah, it is. So
it shouldn't have to be that way, but unfortunately it is. I mean, we have to just be honest, and we can't focus on it. What we have to do is just make sure that we're smart.
Right, exactly. And I like the idea of being able to do sessions on Skype, et cetera, and other things. I think that's the good part of the internet, is that you can do things like that, and it's a safe space to some degree.
It is a safe space. Again, to a degree. And here's what I just think it's fabulous, because certainly I wouldn't have had, and other people wouldn't have had either, the place to go where they could call somebody in the United States. They could listen to you or to me or any of the other hosts that are on these radio stations, and they live in UK, or they live in Iceland or Norway or England or, Hawaii or wherever it is. I mean, we can talk to people across the globe. And, I can remember when, if you had a home phone, calling across the street could be long distance.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
And if you wanted to make an international call, my God, it was an act of Congress, basically, to do that. It was a big deal, and it just, cost a fortune to do that.
Yeah.
So now, we pay an internet service provider for the most of us, and we can just get on this Skype or any of the other ones that are out there as well. There's quite a few of them out there now. And you can have sessions, and you can have radio shows, and you can have meetings, and it's just unlimited. It's wonderful. It's fabulous.
It is the really good side to the internet. There's no doubt about it. Now, you also do regressions, right?
Yep.
So when you do regressions, are you looking at the past lifetimes, or are you going into hypnosis for possible contactees, or how's that working?
I've done both, and still do both. I still do, any of it that comes up. If somebody wants a private session, they usually have a reason for it. In other words, I'm a contactee, and I want to see what I've missed, try to remember what happened, et cetera, and so forth. That's a whole different, set of parameters there when you're trying to help somebody to remember something that they think has happened, right? That they believe has happened. Whereas you're doing a regression, I call them a timeline. And then I do a / past life, because most people, that's what they understand it. A lot of people don't understand what timeline means. And I don't mean necessarily this life cycle. It can be, I've done it where people have ended up in the future, which is really quite bizarre, because it's very different. It's a very different feeling. Some people have ended up where they weren't even in this particular universe, but they were in another timeline. And then most of the time, my smaller classes are held for really these past life, what I call the reincarnation cycle that we're all in. We keep coming back into this earth space over and over again repeatedly. That's what it's for, is to there's always what I call a point of origin. When did the trauma happen? When did the sadness happen? Whatever the case may be. It makes up a lot of our personalities, and we don't even realize that we're carrying around this trauma, this burden. Some people, you see people that are children, small children, and they seem sad, like they can't come into this world feeling sad. And some people come into this world with just different personality quirks, and they don't know why. Mine started, and I'll tell you how it started for me, because it's really interesting. It started because I had a phobia of driving over bridges. I would drive over a bridge, and I would just go into this panic. And, I'm like, I'm the gutsiest person you'd ever want to meet, especially when I was really young, right? I didn't care. I did nothing. I was infallible, right? We all think that. Yeah. And so I'm driving over this bridge, and I get these panic attacks. And like I said, it just was so not me. And about, after a few years of this, one day I was driving over it, and I was like, something else is going on here, because there's no reason for me to feel like this. I've never fell off a bridge in this lifetime. I've never had an accident on a bridge. There's nothing that associates this phobia with driving over these bridges, not anything. Right. So that's what got me started on it. And I went to, of course, in those, I was still doing, at that point, I was involved in the psychic community, or the metaphysical community, if you will. And I knew of a lady that was doing past life regressions, and they were what she calls non-invasive. So I had this past life regression with her, and it popped in what happened, and I was like, okay, so that's when all that happened. So I dubbed it as a point of origin, because once I figured out where it come from, I could go back and replay that over and over and over again in my mind, and I could get a different outcome. I could take
Right.
away the fear. I didn't try to stop my death. See, that's what happened is I fell off this. A bunch of us did. There wasn't just me. There was a whole bunch of us. We were working on this bridge, and it fell,
Mm.
and it broke, and all of us fell to our death. Well, that was the scary part. That's what sent that trauma. That was that, you can just imagine.
Right.
So that's what was triggering every time I drove over this bridge, is that it was going to break, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I got to the point where I could drive. Now I don't even think about driving over a bridge. It doesn't bother me at all.
Oh, that's good.
So that's what started it. And so that I was like, this is the key to healing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I took classes to become certified to do that myself. And I figured, hey, if it helped me, it's going to help somebody else. And in the meantime, I have found a lot of things within myself I've carried in, and I've been able to, I call it the rewrite process, where you go back in and you rewrite what's happened, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it changes the energy. And then what you're doing is you're letting go of that trauma or sadness or whatever it is, so you don't have to repeat it in any other reincarnation in the future, what we call the future timelines.
Exactly. Yeah. Well said. No, I like that one. It kind of reminds me of holographic repatterning. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yep, I am.
Yeah,
I don't do it, but I am familiar with it.
It's kind of like an overlay. But yeah, that's really what it's about, is taking your mastery back and deleting and basically rewriting things and correcting things that are causing trauma. What's interesting when you talk about that bridge, what comes to mind is also that people who are very sensitive, they tend to pick up on a surrounding an event. Say there was a tragedy in some one area. It's not necessarily pertaining to their past lives, but maybe somebody who died maybe a week prior on that same area or in that same area that they're picking up on psychically.
Yeah. Now, see, I looked at that. I looked at that first, but it was any bridge. It was any bridge I was on. It wasn't the same bridge. It was just any bridge. I drive over any bridge. It could be a little short, tiny bridge. It could be a really long bridge. You should have seen it in the early days when I'd have. I don't know if you're familiar with Michigan, but it's got the longest suspension bridge from the lower peninsula to the upper peninsula. Mm-hmm. And you have to drive. It's where one of my brothers lives, is up in the upper peninsula. So when I had to go visit him, I had to go over the bridge. And let me tell you something. I was just almost at death's door by the time I got on the other side of it. It was just awful.
Wow.
Yeah. It was really awful. So now I don't have any issues with it at all. But that's a good point. Let's talk about that for a second, about other people. If you're having a same or similar spot, that there's some kind of a reaction or you get triggered some way, that is something for them to look at. Is somebody pass away? Like you said, was there? And I know that we've all felt like that. Like we've driven down any street, and all of a sudden you just get a kind of this gooby feeling, or a creepy feeling, or a sick feeling. It depends on what's happened as to what emotion is going to come up for the individual, right? Mm-hmm. They can look through their newspapers or news items and see if there was anything that happened within, say, the last few months. And if nothing's happened, then they need to look forward in that same area for news articles or whatever for future events. Mm-hmm. They could also be picking up on something that hasn't happened yet.
Oh, yeah. Very good point. Yeah. That's a great point you make.
Yeah. So, and so that's really fun for people, because that's when they can start exploring, and nobody knows what they're doing because it's nothing weird, right? But that's how they can figure out, hey, I've got some of this going on. I can, let me see if I can expound on this. That's the beginnings. That's the beginnings of opening your doors and allowing yourself to explore other options of how do you express for yourself? How do you feel? How can you expand your awareness, your consciousness?
Right, exactly.
Starts with something simple like that.
Mm-hmm. And I always think there's a cellular memory with an ancestral bloodline. In other words, we can access our ancestors' memories. So to me, it seems like that's the way, because I know things I shouldn't know, but I also come from an old family. And I just tend to tap into things. I know it wasn't my lifetime, but it seems like it must be someone in my family's bloodline, right?
Right.
You ever had that?
Let me tell you a little story here. I have had this vision that it's been since I've been a kid of, I was swimming. You remember those old dive suits they used to have with the big clunky metal hoods?
Right.
Right, and they had like the grate on the front. I mean, just a heavy thing. Anyway, I was in the ocean. I believe I was in the ocean, and there's somebody else there with me, and we're diving. We're we're exploring some cavernous area, and he goes off in another direction and I go off in this other direction, and I find this cavern and it opens up and there's air to breathe, right? It opens up into this other space, and there's all this interesting plant life down there that actually gives off light, like these little glows of purple and white and green. And these little creatures that were running around, they were communicating with me. And I came back through, and we went up, and I removed my hat, and I was a man, and the year was in the 1950s. Sometime in the 1950s. Well, I was born in 55. I don't know if that was me.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I've never figured it out, and I don't really know, but that has stayed with me all these years.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Did you happen to have that after? Well, you probably didn't have it after your initiations into Reiki, right?
No, this started when I was pretty young.
Wow, that's
I was
fascinating.
under the age of 20, and every once in a while that vision would come back to me again and again. But I can tell you how tall this man was. I don't know that I would be looking at myself. I'm just not sure of where that vision came from. I don't know what triggered it. I don't know who it is, but I felt like I was me there. Until I got on top of the boat, and then it was like me stepping back looking at this man, and I thought, now who is that?
Wow. Yeah, that's very interesting. It's almost like remote viewing when you're actually there on the timeline, but you're accessing, almost seeing through someone else's eyes.
Yeah, and so I don't know. Would you think that might be a bloodline thing, or what do you
Well,
think?
it could be an ancestral thing. I've had things in the past where after my initiations into Reiki, because I'm a master teacher also, and I went through a lot of initiations in the 80s and 90s, but I can remember I had events that I was there, and it looked like World War II, but I wasn't, I did not live there. I know it wasn't me, but I was trying to figure out who it was, but I swear to you, it was so real. I knew the names of the people, the ship, what happened, how it blew up. I had all this data. And I was trying to figure out, it must have been from an ancestral. I do come from an ancestry that did fight in the war. So I thought, well, maybe that's them, but they didn't die in the war. So once again, it's very, very interesting. And I think that we're able to tap into the Dream Pool Collective. And that means that we can go into different corridors of whatever's going on here with history, and events. But it's a mystery sometimes.
Well, and it's just one of those fun things, that you kind of, it's like I said, it's just stayed with me, and I'm like, it was a wonderful experience, by the way. I've never been, diving for real in this, in this timeline. So it was really lots of fun to have that experience, to seeing that plant life and everything down there, and the water was just super clear.
It sounds nice.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful experience.
That's much better than what I had, because mine was traumatic. I was trying to help somebody who was pinned under metal.
Oh, bless your heart.
Yeah. And I remember saying, oh, don't worry, I'll get you some help. And I left, and all of a sudden I heard him say, oh, God. And then this thing caved in, and the water came in because it was hit with a missile. Apparently he was trapped underneath. It was really vivid. I mean, like vivid, not in a dream, not like a dream, like, live real time stuff. So yeah, it was kind of wild.
Yeah, because you can hear and feel and sense. That's what happened to me. Yeah. Fascinating.
It is. So we always wonder, who was that? I don't know. But it's interesting, maybe one of these centuries I'll figure it out too.
Yeah. If we could only remember everything that we accomplished in this life cycle and take with us, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but did you ever write when you were younger? Did you always have an ability to kind of write, or automatic write?
I used to do automatic writing before I even knew I was doing automatic writing, or there was a term put to it. There was a lot of these things I used to do that I never had. I didn't even know what it was. I just did it. It was just part of who I was.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I used to do when I was younger too. And I think that's part of it, is just being able to stream energy through that level of consciousness. And it sounds like you were always wired for the type of work you're doing now. No doubt about it.
I think so. And it kind of makes me the oddball in my family, for sure. But there was a reason. I think there's always a reason for who we are.
Well, definitely. Yeah.
And you just have to own it. You can't step away from it. It's not going to go away. You just have to own it. And when you do it, it brought a lot of peace to me when I finally figured out what was going on, what I needed to do. I had a lot of peace with it.
Right. And you also
I
bring a
still
lot of
do.
peace to others. I mean, that's the thing. People are in such need of healing on so many different levels that when you're doing that kind of work, it's the best work you can possibly be doing, in my opinion, because it really benefits everybody.
You know, I always say it's almost hard to, to have have people pay to get this help, right? You have to charge for it,
Hmm.
because almost always in a situation like that, I benefit just as much as they do,
Hmm.
just by
Right.
being in that energy.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And with that being said, we're going to have a break. Everybody, you're listening to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. This is Solaris BlueRaven in Studio A, and my wonderful guest tonight is Rebecca Jernigan. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.